friends, and welcome back to 155 Books. So today I've been thinking about how after Christmas it kind of feels like winter is slowly slipping from our grasp, or my grasp, because personally I absolutely adore winter and autumn, which is probably something that's quite unpopular in terms of winter, especially a lot of people, because it's so cold and dark, people don't really like winter. However, that is exactly why I like it. So when it comes into the new year, I just want to hold on to it a little bit longer. But then as soon as spring comes along, obviously I do get very excited about spring. So of course I was thinking about the kind of books I could read to hold on to that winter feeling a little bit longer. So today I'm going to be sharing 5 books that give me that wintry, cosy feel that I've read before, and that's some of my favourite winter reads. So this first book on my list is actually one I haven't mentioned on my channel for quite a while, because I don't like to re-mention books too often, but this book is the ultimate winter cosy read for me, and that is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. This is probably my favourite book of all time. If I had to pick just one book that I could reread over and over again, it would be this one. And every single time I do tend to reread it, it's normally in the winter around Christmas. And I think that's because there is a lot of scenes in this book where there's snow, and the kids are playing around in snow, and it's cold, and it ends with snow falling. And historical fiction, for some weird reason, just reminds me of winter, again, normally because they're set during these cold, bleak times. But in a weird way, this one is kind of cozy to me as well, even though I bawl my eyes out every single time I read it, even though I know what's going to happen at the end. It's just such a familiar, heartwarming story, and it feels like a hug in a book, even though, like I say, it's really sad. For me, it is just the perfect book to get snugly under the blankets with a hot cup of tea and read into the late winter nights. And I really want to do that again soon, but like I say, winter is slowly leaving us, and I don't know if I would have time to reread this one. This next book on my list is a bit of a different one, but it does involve the word winter, and that is The Gap of Time by Jeanette Winterson, because this is a Shakespeare retelling of The Winter's Tale. And I don't really know why when I think of winter I think of this book, because a lot of it is set in a hot climate. It's not set during winter, but I think it's because this one has a combination of Jeanette Winterson's beautiful writing and Shakespeare aspects, which again also are kind of wintry to me, that as a whole it's a wintry type book. As well as that, this story is very sort of family orientated, and I think that in itself makes it kind of wintry for me. This next book on my list definitely screams winter. And again, it's one that I did read during winter, and it's one when I think about rereading it, I want to reread it during winter. But that is The Invisible Life of Addie Laroo by V.E. Schwab. So this is actually the only V.E. Schwab book I have read to date. I do have another one on my TBR, which is Vicious, which again I kind of want to read during winter. But the whole concept of this, it just makes it a winter book. I don't know how people could read this at any other time except for winter. Essentially, it's a chunky, fast-paced, intriguing story that again just makes you want to get into bed under the covers, get all cozy with a big cup of tea and just devour, which is basically what I did the first time I read it. It's semi-historical fiction, and it starts in France in 1715, and it is on the eve of Addie's wedding night, or wedding day. She's due to be married, and it is the last thing that she wants, to the point where she runs off to the woods and makes a deal with the devil to avoid having to get married to this person. But obviously all deals come with consequences, and Addie's consequence is that every single time someone leaves a room, they forget her. And it is, of course, a massive love story. There is a love story interwoven throughout this novel, with more than one person, and there is also a big plot twist that was my favourite thing ever, which I don't see a lot of people talk about because it is kind of, I guess, a spoiler, but it's the best thing about this book, but again, I'm not going to spoil that for you. It's definitely better going into this blind, but then also I'm really intrigued about rereading this because I haven't reread it yet, but I feel like I would get a lot more out of it during a reread, knowing what happens throughout the book. But yes, like I say, whenever I think of this, it just reminds me of winter. This next book on my list, again, surprise, surprise, I read during winter, and this author generally just gives me a winter vibe. But the particular book by this author I wanted to talk about in this video was Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. So all of the Charles Dickens books just give me that winter Christmassy vibe, and I think it's because a lot of them are very dark. So obviously you have got A Christmas Carol, which is Christmassy in its name and its tale and its story. You've got Oliver Twist, which to me just reminds me of Christmas because of the musical, which I watch every Christmas. But this one again also reminds me of Christmas because of its dark setting and the fact that the first time I read it, it was during winter. This one especially is really wintry for me, and again I can't really put my finger on why. Maybe because there are, like I said before, some bleak, dark scenes where it's wet and it's dark and it's wintry. And I guess, again, because it's chunky and it's one that you just want to sit with and devour, which is definitely what I did with this the first time I read it. It's also a very bittersweet one, which I think a lot of people maybe don't expect. Like, I definitely didn't expect that reading it for the first time. There's basically this big setup from the beginning that you think is going to have maybe a slightly different ending that it does not have. So it kind of like tears your heart into several different places and pieces. And there's also obviously another thing I love about Charles Dickens, many plot twists, which the first Charles Dickens book that I read, which was A Tale of Two Cities, I was shocked at the plot twists, and then I realised that it's just something that he does really well. And I would say Great Expectations is probably one of the better ones for that, because like I say, there's several plot twists in this that are a surprise if you don't know the story, and something that just makes you want to keep reading. So the next book on this list is actually a trilogy of books that again have the word winter in the title, and for these it's definitely that the setting is very wintry and that the story itself is very wintry, but that is of course the Winternight Trilogy by Catherine Arden. So I read these a few years ago, and I liked the first one, but I wasn't enthralled by it. So obviously these books just get hyped massively on BookTube and in the book community quite rightly because they are fantastic. But the second book for me is by far the best one. So the second book for me, there's a scene at the end that will forever be one of my favourite scenes in a book ever. So I think if I reread these, I wouldn't bother with the first one or the last one. I would just reread the second one because I love it that much. If, for example, I wasn't in the mood to reread an entire series. But in every single one of these, you get the same kind of wintry setting. They are fantasy based on Russian folklore, and they follow our main character, Vasya, who is a very sort of, I guess, hit and miss protagonist. She is constantly making mistakes, causing a lot of mayhem, to the dismay of her family and lots of other people around her. But it is very interesting to see her journey and where that takes her, and throughout the books, like I say, the journey just gets wilder and wilder, and there are just fascinating characters in these books, fascinating scenes, and like I say, the folklore aspect, the magic, all of those things that are sort of weaved into it make it one of my favourite fantasy trilogies of all time. So those are the 5 really cosy wintry books that I would just love to reread this winter, just to hold on to winter that little bit longer. Please share with me down below in the comments what your favourite wintry cosy read is, and I can add that to my TBR and maybe try and read it in the few months of winter we have left. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you soon in my next video. Bye!